That is a biohazard. I will not have drug paraphernalia in my first-class cabin. Rowan's hand trembled, clutching the small, clear vial. It's insulin. I'm type 1. Please, I need... Snatch. No excuses, Camille Archer hissed, her eyes manic. With a sneer that twisted her perfect red lipstick, she marched to the trash compactor. Don't! Please, that's my last dose! Crunch. The sound of shattering glass wasn't just loud. It was the sound of a countdown starting. The interior of the Vista Airways, Boeing 777, smelled of expensive leather, white tea, and the subtle metallic scent of filtered altitude. It was a smell Rowan Hollister usually associated with safety, with the long trips he took between his mother's home in Chicago and his father's estate in London. But today, the air felt thin, suffocating. Rowan adjusted the cuffs of his oversized gray hoodie, trying to shrink into the plush embrace of Seat 1A. He was 17, with skin the color of deep umber and hair twisted into neat, short locks. At his feet sat a battered, sticker-covered cello case, a customized carbon fiber BAM high-tech case that cost more than most cars, though to the untrained eye it just looked like well-traveled luggage. He wasn't trying to draw attention. He just wanted to get to London for the Royal Academy auditions. But in the ecosystem of first class, invisibility was a privilege he wasn't afforded. Champagne. Or perhaps something less complicated. The voice dripped with saccharine venom. Rowan looked up. Standing over him was the purser, Camille Archer. She was a woman who wore her uniform not as service attire, but as armor. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her eyelids taut, and her name tag gleamed aggressively under the cabin lights. "Just water, please," Rowan said, his voice soft. He tapped the screen of his phone, checking his glucose numbers. The Dexcom G7 app showed a steady 110 milligrams per deciliter, but the arrow was tilting slightly upward. The stress of the TSA checkpoint, where they had patted him down 3 times despite his pre-check status, had spiked his cortisol. Camille didn't move. She stood in the aisle, blocking the flow of boarding passengers, staring at him. Her gaze raked over his hoodie, his sneakers, and finally, the cello case. "Ticket?" she said. It wasn't a question. Rowan blinked. "I scanned it at the gate. I need to verify seat assignments. We have a full manifest today, and there have been errors with the booking system regarding upgrades." She let the word upgrades hang in the air like a dirty rag. Rowan reached into his pocket and pulled out the boarding pass. Rowan Hollister. Seat 1A. Camille snatched it, her manicured nail scratching his thumb. She stared at the paper, then at her digital tablet. She frowned. The name on the seat was technically linked to the Worthington Group corporate account, but the passenger name matched the boy. "Hollister," she muttered. "Not a Worthington." "My stepfather booked it," Rowan lied smoothly. It was safer than the truth. If he said his father was Gideon Worthington, people assumed he was lying. Gideon was a ghost, a titan of private equity who owned half of Manhattan and London, and he was white. Rowan was the son of Gideon's late whirlwind romance with a jazz singer in New Orleans. The world didn't know Rowan existed, and Gideon preferred to keep his son out of the tabloids for safety. Camille handed the ticket back, flicking it onto his tray table as if it were contaminated. "Keep your feet off the bulkhead and move that instrument case to the closet. It's a tripping hazard." "It fits under the closet, now." Rowan swallowed his pride. He knew better than to argue with flight crews. He stood up, towering over her at 6'2", and gently lifted the cello. As he walked past her to the forward closet, he felt her eyes burning holes into his back. He didn't see the look she exchanged with the junior flight attendant, Amelia Ford. Amelia, a young woman with kind eyes, looked nervous. "Camille, the manifest says he's a VIP," Amelia whispered near the galley. Camille scoffed, pouring a glass of sparkling water for the man in 2B, a senator. Please, he's some lottery winner's kid or a scholarship charity case. Look at him. He's wearing a hoodie in first. He doesn't belong here, and I'm not going to let him turn my cabin into a ghetto. Rowan returned to his seat, heart thumping. His Dexcom buzzed against his thigh. 160 milligrams per deciliter, rising fast. He sat down and closed his eyes. Just 8 hours, he told himself. Just 8 hours, and then I'm with Dad. But the plane hadn't even pushed back from the gate, and the war had already begun. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed off as they reached cruising altitude over the Atlantic. The cabin was dimly lit, most passengers settling in for the long haul. Rowan, however, felt terrible. His head was swimming. The stress spike hadn't come down. He checked his receiver. 240 milligrams per deciliter, high. He needed a correction bolus. He usually used his pump, but the tubing had snagged and kinked during the rush to stow his cello. He needed to do a manual injection. He unzipped his carry-on bag, a sleek leather backpack, and pulled out his diabetic supply kit. It was a small black pouch containing alcohol wipes, a fresh syringe, and a vial of Humalog insulin. He tried to be discreet. He hated needles, even after 4 years of diagnosis. He laid the kit on the tray table and rolled up his sleeve. "What in God's name do you think you are doing?" The voice was a whip crack. Rowan jumped, nearly dropping the vial. Camille Archer was looming over him again, her face a mask of horrified outrage. I'm taking my medicine," Rowan stammered. "Medicine?" Camille's voice rose, drawing the attention of the senator in 2B and a tech CEO in 1F. "You are preparing to inject drugs in my cabin?" "It's insulin," Rowan said, panic rising. "I'm a diabetic. My sugar is high." Camille snatched the black pouch off the table. She unzipped it fully, exposing the syringes. "Needles. Uncapped needles and liquid vials. This is a violation of federal aviation safety protocols." "No, it's not. I have a prescription. It's in the bag." Rowan reached for it, but Camille recoiled, clutching the pouch to her chest. "Sit down," she barked. "Do not approach me." "You don't understand," Rowan pleaded, his hands shaking. The hypoglycemia wasn't hitting yet, but the adrenaline was making him nauseous. "I need that. If I don't take it, I can go into ketoacidosis. Look at my monitor." He held up his phone, showing the graph. Camille didn't look at the screen. She looked at a young black boy with a needle. She saw a threat. She saw a confirmation of every bias she had nurtured for 20 years in the industry. "I don't care what app you have," Camille sneered. "You should have declared this. You cannot handle open needles in the presence of other passengers. It is a biohazard. It is a threat to the safety of this flight." "Emilia!" Camille shouted toward the galley. Emilia came running, her face pale. "Camille, what's wrong?" "We have a security situation. Passenger 1A is in possession of undocumented paraphernalia." "It's insulin!" Rowan yelled, tears of frustration pricking his eyes. "Ask a doctor. Is there a doctor on board?" "Be quiet," Camille snapped. "I am the purser. I am the authority here, and I say this is contraband." She turned on her heel and marched toward the galley, where the trash compactors and biohazard disposal units were located. Rowan unbuckled his seatbelt. "Wait, no!" He scrambled out of his seat, stumbling slightly as the plane hit a pocket of turbulence. He reached the galley entrance just as Camille held the pouch over the disposal chute, a heavy, suction-based system designed to crush and store waste. "That is a biohazard. I will not have drug paraphernalia in my first-class cabin," she screamed. "Please, that's my last dose. My pump is broken," Rowan cried out. Camille looked him dead in the eye. There was no protocol in her eyes now, only malice, a need to dominate. Snatch. She ripped the vial out of the pouch. Crunch. She dropped the glass vial into the chute and pressed the black button. The mechanism whirred, a sickening grinding noise that echoed through the galley. The insulin, Rowan's lifeline, was gone. Rowan stood frozen, his mouth open. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the air. "Sit down, Mr. Hollister," Camille said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "Or I will have the pilot restrain you with zip ties. Do not test me." Rowan backed away, his legs feeling like jelly. He collapsed back into seat 1A. He was trapped in a metal tube at 35,000 feet, his blood turning into syrup, with the woman who had just sentenced him to a slow death guarding the door. 30 minutes passed. Rowan was sweating profusely. His vision was starting to blur at the edges. He checked the Dexcom. 310 milligrams per deciliter. He was dehydrated. His body was screaming for insulin to process the sugar in his blood. Without it, his body would start breaking down fat for fuel, producing ketones. Toxic acid. He needed help. But he couldn't ask the crew. Camille was watching him like a hawk from the jump seat, scrolling on her phone, looking satisfied. Amelia had tried to bring him water, but Camille had reprimanded her, saying, "Don't coddle the junkie." Rowan's fingers fumbled with his phone. He had purchased the in-flight Wi-Fi. It was spotty, slow, but it was working. He opened his contacts. He scrolled past Mom, past his piano teacher. He stopped at Dad. Emergency. He hesitated. Gideon Worthington was a man who moved mountains, but he was also a man who demanded strength. He had only been in Rowan's life publicly for 2 years. Rowan didn't want to seem like a child who couldn't handle a flight, but then a wave of nausea hit him so hard he doubled over. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was survival. He pressed the call button. Not a voice call. Gideon wouldn't answer an unknown number while working. He opened the encrypted messaging app they used, Signal. Rowan. "Dad! Help!" He waited. The 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Gideon. "Rowan? Are you in London yet? I'm in a board meeting." Rowan's thumbs struggled to hit the right keys. Rowan. "On plane. Vista 404. Purser took my insulin. Destroyed it. Said it was drugs. Pump broken. Sugar 320. Feels sick." The response was instantaneous. Gideon. "She destroyed it?" Rowan. "Threw it in compactor. Won't let me speak to pilot. Threatened zip ties. Dad, I'm scared." Gideon. "Stay calm. Drink water. Do not engage her. Give me 5 minutes." 4,000 miles away, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the Singapore skyline, Gideon Worthington stood up. The room was filled with the sharks of the financial world. Asher Rothschild, head of the European Central Bank's Oversight Committee, and 3 ministers of trade. They were discussing a billion-dollar merger. "Gideon?" Asher asked, leaning back in his chair. "We haven't finished the valuation on the Port Authority." Gideon didn't look at the papers. His face, usually a mask of stoic British reserve, had turned a terrifying shade of pale, his jaw set in a line of granite. He looked at his phone, then at the men in the room. "Gentlemen," Gideon said, his voice low and vibrating with a dangerous frequency, "the meeting is adjourned." "You can't just leave," one of the ministers protested. "This deal expires at midnight." "My son is being tortured," Gideon said. The room went silent. Gideon walked to the window, pressing a speed dial number on his phone. It wasn't 911. It was a direct line to the private office of Marcus Sterling, the CEO of Vista Airways. "Pick up, Marcus. For the sake of your soul, pick up," Gideon whispered. The line clicked. "Gideon, to what do I owe the pleasure? I thought you were in Singapore." "Marcus," Gideon said, his voice devoid of warmth, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. You have exactly 60 seconds to explain to me why your cabin crew on Flight 404 is attempting to murder my son." "What? Gideon, I don't—" "My son, Rowan. He is in Seat 1A. Your purser, a woman named—" Gideon checked the text Rowan had sent earlier with a photo of her badge. "Camille Archer. She has confiscated and destroyed his life-saving medical equipment. She has accused him of drug use. She is refusing him aid." "Gideon, surely there's a misunderstanding. Camille is our top—" "There is no misunderstanding." Gideon roared, slamming his hand against the conference table. The glass shook. Asher Rothschild watched, wide-eyed. He had known Gideon for 30 years and never seen him lose control. "My son is diabetic, Marcus. He is currently going into hyperglycemic shock at 30,000 feet. If he falls into a coma, I will not sue you. I will not bankrupt you." Gideon paused, his voice dropping to a whisper that was infinitely more terrifying than the shout. "I will own you. I will buy your airline. I will strip it for parts, and I will spend the rest of my life ensuring that you and Ms. Archer never work in so much as a toll booth again." I'm on it," Marcus stammered. "I'll call the cockpit via SATCOM immediately." "No," Gideon said. "You won't just call. You are going to land that plane, now." "Gideon, they are over the Atlantic. The nearest divert field is—" "I don't care if you have to land it on an aircraft carrier. Get my son on the ground. Get paramedics to him. Or so help me God, I will rain fire upon your entire fleet." Gideon hung up. He turned to Asher Rothschild. "Asher," Gideon said, buttoning his suit jacket. "I need your jet. Mine is in maintenance in Dubai. I need to get to— Where is the nearest airport to their coordinates?" Asher checked his tablet, pulling up the flight tracker. "They're passing south of Greenland. Nearest divert is Keflavik, Iceland." "Iceland," Gideon said. "Get the pilots ready." Asher nodded, standing up. "I'm coming with you. If Vista Airways is violating medical rights laws, the Oversight Committee will want to witness it." Gideon looked out the window at the storm clouds gathering over the city. "Pray for that woman, Asher, because the law is the least of her problems." On Flight 404, the cockpit printer whirred to life. Captain David Miller frowned, taking a sip of his coffee. Messages from dispatch usually came through the digital ACARS screen. A printed message meant something long or something legal. He tore the paper off. His co-pilot, a young man named Evans, leaned over. "Weather update?" Miller read the message. His blood ran cold. "Priority 1, CEO directive. Divert immediately. Keflavik. Medical emergency seat 1A. Threat level critical. Note: owner of aircraft leasing holding company has revoked flight certificate effective immediately pending landing." Miller looked at Evans. "The owner of the leasing company? That's Gideon Worthington." "The billionaire? We just got grounded by the landlord. Mid-air." Miller grabbed the handset. "I need the purser up here, now." In the cabin, Camille was halfway through pouring a mimosa when the call chimed 3 times, the signal for pilot to purser, urgent. She smirked, looking at Rowan, who was now curled in a ball in his seat, shivering. "Probably turbulence," she muttered to herself. "Ideally enough to knock some sense into the delinquent in 1A. She picked up the interphone. "Cockpit, this is Camille." "Camille," the captain's voice was tight. "Prepare the cabin. We are initiating an emergency descent into Iceland." Camille blinked. "Iceland? Why? Mechanical?" "No, medical. Seat 1A. Camille froze. She looked at Rowan. He looked half dead, but surely— "Captain," she said, lowering her voice, "with respect, 1A is just faking it. I confiscated some contraband from him, and he's throwing a tantrum. There is no need to incur the cost of a divert." There was a silence on the line, a silence so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. "Camille," the captain said, his voice unrecognizable, "we just received a direct order from the CEO of the airline, and a legal notice from the man who owns this plane. Seat 1A is Gideon Worthington's son, and if he dies, we are all going to prison. Secure the cabin, and if you know what's good for you, you better pray that boy wakes up." The phone clicked dead. Camille stared at the handset. The color drained from her face, leaving only the garish red lipstick. She turned slowly to look at seat 1A. Rowan was slumped against the window, and the plane began to bank sharply to the left. The Boeing 777-300ER, a machine designed to conquer continents, felt suddenly fragile as it initiated a tactical descent toward Keflavik International Airport. The cabin angle was steep, too steep for a standard approach. Captain Miller wasn't flying for comfort anymore. He was flying against the clock of a dying boy's metabolism. In the first-class cabin, the atmosphere had shifted from annoyed confusion to palpable dread. The senator in 2B, who had been demanding a refill on his scotch, was now gripping his armrests, watching the flight attendants strap themselves in with trembling hands. Rowan Hollister was fading. The pain in his abdomen was a sharp, twisting knot, radiating up into his chest. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. Kussmaul breathing, the body's desperate attempt to blow off the carbon dioxide building up in his acidifying blood. His vision was tunneling, the edges of the world turning a grainy gray. "Water," he croaked, his tongue feeling like sandpaper. Camille Archer sat in the jump seat facing the cabin, her arms crossed over her chest. She wasn't looking at Rowan. She was looking past him, staring at the bulkhead, her jaw clenched so tight a muscle feathered in her cheek. She was running the narrative in her head over and over. He was disruptive. The needles were unsecured. "I followed TSA Guideline 4.1 regarding biohazards. I am the purser. I am right." But the captain's voice over the intercom shattered her internal rehearsal. "Cabin crew, prepare for immediate landing. We are on final approach. Ground emergency services have been notified." The plane shuddered as it punched through the thick, icy cloud layer over Iceland. Rain lashed against the windows. The engines roared in reverse thrust the second the wheels slammed onto the wet tarmac, throwing everyone forward against their belts. Rowan's head lolled forward, hitting the seat back in front of him. He didn't have the strength to lift it. As the plane taxied, too fast, toward a remote stand, flashing blue lights reflected off the rain-slicked wing. Not one or two. A fleet. Ambulances, fire trucks, and 3 black SUVs with diplomatic plates. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Usually, this was the cue for the elite of first class to stand up and grab their Toomey bags. Today, nobody moved. The captain's voice barked again. "Everyone remain seated. Paramedics are boarding. Clear the aisle, now." The forward door hissed open, letting in a blast of freezing North Atlantic air. 2 paramedics in high-visibility yellow jackets stormed in, carrying a trauma bag and a portable stretcher. They didn't look like the polite American EMTs Camille was used to. These were Icelandic rescue specialists, efficient and grim. "Where is the patient?" the lead paramedic shouted, scanning the cabin. Camille unbuckled her harness. She stood up, smoothing her skirt, her instincts to control the scene kicking in. "I am the purser. The passenger in 1A is exhibiting signs of withdrawal. I confiscated a needle kit earlier." The paramedic ignored her completely, shoving past her with a force that sent her stumbling back into the galley. He knelt beside Rowan. "Can you hear me? Can you squeeze my hand?" Rowan's eyes fluttered half open. "Dad," he whispered. Did he come?" "Blood glucose check now," the lead paramedic yelled to his partner. He lifted Rowan's wrist, feeling the thready, racing pulse. The partner snapped a test strip into a hospital-grade glucometer and pricked Rowan's finger. The machine beeped. "It just says, 'Hey,' the partner said, eyes widening. "It's off the scale, over 600. Breath smells like acetone. He's in severe DKA. Get 2 lines in, saline wide open. We need to dilute the blood before his heart stops." Camille stepped forward again, her voice shrill. "I told you he had needles. It's probably heroin or—" The lead paramedic spun around. He was a large man with a red beard, and the look he gave her was one of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Heroin causes respiratory depression and pinpoint pupils," he barked. "This boy is hyperventilating and his breath smells like fruit. It is classic diabetic ketoacidosis. You took his insulin?" "It was a biohazard," Camille snapped, though her voice wavered for the first time. "It was unsecured." "You idiot!" the paramedic hissed. You didn't confiscate drugs. You confiscated his life support. He turned back to Rowan. Let's move. He's crashing. They lifted Rowan onto the stretcher. His lanky frame looked small, almost fragile under the thermal blankets. As they rushed him past the rows of stunned passengers, the senator in 2B stood up. "Officer," the senator said to the Icelandic police officer who had just boarded behind the medics. "That woman," he pointed a shaking finger at Camille. "She threw it in the trash. The boy begged her. I saw it. We all saw it." Camille's eyes darted around the cabin. She looked for allies. She looked for the nod of approval she usually got when she enforced the rules. She found only accusatory glares. The police officer, a tall woman with Le Greglan printed on her vest, stepped toward Camille. "Ms. Archer?" "Yes, I am the purser." "You are detained. Please collect your belongings and follow me." "Detained?" Camille laughed, a high, nervous sound. "For what? Doing my job? I have a union representative. I demand to speak to the captain." "The captain is currently giving a statement to the Civil Aviation Administration," the officer said calmly, "and he has surrendered the flight logs. You are not being detained for an aviation violation, ma'am." "Then for what?" "Attempted manslaughter." The Landspitali University Hospital in Reykjavik was a fortress of concrete and glass, battered by the relentless Icelandic wind. Inside the ICU waiting room, the silence was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic beep of monitors echoing from the bays. It had been 4 hours since Flight 404 had landed. Outside the tarmac of Keflavik Airport was a scene of organized chaos. The Vista Airways 777 was parked in a quarantine zone, surrounded by fuel trucks and police vehicles. But the real spectacle was happening on the private runway. A Gulfstream G700, sleek and silver, touched down with aggressive precision. The engines hadn't even fully spooled down before the stairs lowered. Gideon Worthington descended. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that had cost more than the annual salary of the ground crew watching him, but he looked like he had walked through a hurricane. His tie was gone. His collar was unbuttoned. His eyes were dark voids of focus. Behind him walked Asher Rothschild on the phone, speaking rapid-fire French to legal counsel in Brussels. A black Mercedes van waited on the tarmac. Gideon didn't wait for the driver to open the door. He ripped it open himself. "Hospital, now," Gideon said. The driver, a local attaché arranged by Asher, nodded and floored it. The drive to Reykjavik took 40 minutes. Gideon spent the entire time staring at his phone, watching the live feed of the hospital vitals that his private medical team had hacked into, or rather, gained authorized access to, via a generous donation to the hospital board made 5 minutes prior. Heart rate, 115. pH, 7.1. Potassium, critical. "He's fighting," Asher said softly, putting a hand on Gideon's shoulder. "He shouldn't have to," Gideon replied. His voice was terrifyingly devoid of inflection. "He was on a plane, Asher. He was in a seat I paid for, on an airline I have bailed out twice in the last decade. He was supposed to be drinking apple juice and watching a movie." Gideon turned to look at Asher. "Do you know what she said to him, according to the text?" Asher shook his head. "She called him a junkie. She threw his insulin in a trash compactor while he begged." Gideon looked back out the window at the gray lava fields passing by. "I am going to burn her world down, Asher. And then I am going to salt the earth." When they arrived at the hospital, the scene was chaotic. Reporters had already sniffed out the story: a grounded flight, a billionaire's son, a mid-air arrest. Flashes popped as Gideon stepped out of the van. He ignored them, moving through the crowd like a shark parting a school of fish. Inside, the hospital administrator, Dr. Bjornsson, met them. "Mr. Worthington, we have stabilized him." Gideon let out a breath he felt he'd been holding since Singapore. "Is he conscious?" "Groggy. We have him on an insulin drip and potassium replacement. The acidosis is reversing, but his kidneys took a hit. We need to monitor for cerebral edema. But he is asking for you. Gideon nodded. Take me to him. They walked through the sterile corridors. When Gideon entered the ICU room, the machinery fell away. All he saw was his son. Rowan looked small in the bed, tubes running into his arms, his skin pale and clammy. "Dad!" Rowan rasped. Gideon was at his side in an instant, kneeling on the hard linoleum floor. He took Rowan's hand, careful of the IV lines. "I'm here, Ro. I'm here." "I tried to tell her," Rowan whispered, tears leaking from his eyes. "I showed her the app. She broke it." "I know," Gideon said, brushing the locks back from Rowan's forehead. "I know you did. You were brave. You were so smart to call me. Am I in trouble? For the plane?" Gideon's heart broke. No, Rowan. You are the only person on that plane who isn't in trouble." Rowan's eyes drifted shut. "Tired. Sleep. I'm not leaving." Gideon stayed in that position for 20 minutes until Rowan's breathing deepened into a true sleep. Then he stood up. He turned to Dr. Bjornson. "He stays in this room. Private security on the door. No one enters without my approval. Not even the police." "Understood." Gideon walked out of the room. Asher was waiting in the hallway. "The police are holding the flight crew at the airport police station," Asher said. "They're waiting for legal representation from the airline." Gideon checked his watch. "Vista's lawyers are in New York. They won't be here for 6 hours." "Gideon," Asher warned, "you can't just storm a police station." Gideon adjusted his cuffs. "I don't intend to storm it, Asher. I intend to provide a witness statement." The holding room at the Keflavik police station was stark, painted in institutional beige. Camille Archer sat at a metal table, still in her immaculate navy blue uniform, though the scarf was now slightly askew. She was fuming. "This is ridiculous," she said to Amelia, who was sitting in the corner crying into a tissue. "Stop crying, Amelia. We followed protocol. The passenger was erratic. He had undocumented sharps. The captain panicked because of who the father is. That's all." "He was dying, Camille," Amelia sobbed. "Didn't you see him? He turned gray." "He was going through withdrawal," Camille snapped. "I've seen it a dozen times on the red-eye from Ibiza. They shake, they vomit, they beg. It's a performance." The door opened. Camille straightened up, expecting a lawyer. Instead, a man walked in. He was tall, wearing a suit that looked like it had been cut from storm clouds. He didn't look at Amelia. He walked straight to the table and placed a single sheet of paper on it. It was a printout of the flight manifest. Camille looked up at him. She didn't know who he was, but the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Who are you?" "I am waiting for my union rep." "Your union rep isn't coming," Gideon said calmly. He pulled out a chair and sat opposite her. "Because the union doesn't represent employees who commit felonies while on duty." "I haven't committed a crime. I protected the safety of the cabin." Camille crossed her arms. "And you have no right to be here." "I have every right," Gideon said. "I am the father of the boy you tried to kill." Camille's arrogance faltered for a fraction of a second. She blinked. "You? But he's black?" Gideon finished the sentence for her. His voice was soft, conversational, which made it all the more terrifying. "Yes, he is. And I am white. Biology is a fascinating thing, isn't it? But let's not talk about genetics. Let's talk about insulin." "It was unlabeled," Camille lied. "It was Humalog," Gideon corrected. "In a standard 10-milliliter vial, prescribed by Dr. Eris Thorne of Chicago Sinai. The prescription label was on the pouch you threw in the trash." "He was threatening me with a needle." "The witnesses say he was sitting down. The senator in 2B says you approached him while he was preparing an injection. The CCTV from the galley—" Gideon tapped the table. "Which I have just reviewed with the station chief. Shows you snatching the bag while he was begging." Camille's face went pale. "CCTV? The galley cameras are for monitoring food carts. They don't record audio." "No," Gideon smiled, a cold, shark-like expression. But they do record lips, and they record actions. We saw you crush the vial. We saw the malice, Ms. Archer. It was quite cinematic. Camille stood up. I want a lawyer. You're going to need a team of them, Gideon said. But let me tell you what is going to happen before they arrive. He leaned forward. Vista Airways is currently drafting your termination letter, not for negligence, for gross misconduct endangering human life. That means no pension, no severance, and a permanent blacklisting from the FAA, EASA, and the IATA. You will never set foot on an airplane again, not even as a passenger, because I will have you placed on the no-fly list as a security risk. You can't do that, Camille whispered. I can do anything, Gideon said. I just bought the debt on Vista's 3 main logistical hubs. Technically, as of an hour ago, I am your boss's landlord. He stood up and walked over to Amelia. The young flight attendant shrank back. You, Gideon said. Amelia looked up, terrified. I tried to tell her. I wanted to get the captain. She told me to shut up. Gideon looked at her for a long moment. He saw the genuine fear, the remorse. Then you will testify, Gideon said. You will tell the police exactly what happened, every word she said, every slur she used. I will, Amelia nodded rapidly. I promise. Gideon turned back to Camille. She was staring at the table, her hands trembling. The reality was finally crashing down. The armor was cracking. Why? Gideon asked. He stood at the door. I just want to know, why did you do it? Was it the hoodie, the skin? Or do you just enjoy hurting people who can't fight back? Camille looked up. Her eyes were wet, but there was still a flicker of defiance. He didn't belong there. He didn't look like he belonged. Gideon nodded slowly. That's what I thought. He opened the door. 2 Icelandic officers were waiting. She's all yours, Gideon said. As he walked down the corridor, he pulled out his phone. He dialed the number for the CEO of the Vista Airways. Marcus, Gideon said into the phone. I'm in Iceland. My son is stable. Now let's talk about the price of your stock, because by tomorrow morning it's going to be 0. He hung up and walked out into the biting wind. The war wasn't over. It was just moving to a new battlefield. 72 hours after Flight 404 touched down in Iceland, the headquarters of Vista Airways in downtown Chicago was under siege. It wasn't a military blockade, but to the executives inside, it felt far worse. A phalanx of satellite trucks lined Wacker Drive, their telescopic dishes pointed like accusations at the shimmering glass tower. The story hadn't just gone global, it had gone nuclear. Hashtag Justice for Rowan was trending #1 on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, fueled by a leaked video from the senator in seat 2B. The footage was grainy, but the audio was crystal clear. Camille Archer's shrill voice screaming about drug paraphernalia, followed by the sickening crunch of glass. On the 50th floor, the atmosphere in the executive suite was toxic. The air conditioning was set to a crisp 68 degrees, yet Marcus Sterling, the CEO of Vista Airways, was sweating through his bespoke Italian silk shirt. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the ants, the protesters, swarming the plaza below. They're burning their frequent flyer cards, Marcus muttered, turning to his vice president of public relations, a woman named Sarah who looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. Actually burning them on live TV. We need a statement that emphasizes protocol ambiguity, Sarah suggested, her voice trembling. We spin it as a complex training failure regarding medical device identification. We don't admit fault, we admit confusion. Then we fire Archer publicly, throw her to the wolves, and settle with the boy. Marcus paced the length of the mahogany table, his reflection ghosting in the polished surface. And the settlement? What's the number? 5 million. The CFO, a man named Henderson with a face like a bulldog, grunted. Standard liability cap for non-fatal emotional distress. Maybe push it to 7 if we need a gag order. The room was filled with the board of directors, 12 men and women who viewed passengers not as human beings, but as self-loading cargo units. To them, Rowan Hollister wasn't a victim. He was a depreciating asset. $5 million seems excessive for a diabetic episode, Henderson grumbled, tapping his pen on a leather notepad. The boy lived, didn't he? He's in a private hospital in Reykjavik eating smoked salmon. We're overreacting. The stock is down 12%, Henderson, Marcus snapped. This isn't about the boy's health, it's about the optics. We make it go away, today. Just then, the heavy double doors at the far end of the boardroom didn't just open. They exploded inward, hitting the magnetic stoppers with a violence that made the crystal water pitchers rattle. Two of Vista's private security guards stumbled backward into the room, looking terrified. Behind them, a wall of men in dark suits cleared a path. And then, Gideon Worthington walked in. He moved with the terrifying stillness of a predator that has already cornered its prey. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't running. He simply walked into the room as if he owned the air they were breathing. He wasn't alone. Flanking him was a woman with skin the color of obsidian, wearing a white power suit that looked sharp enough to cut glass. This was Laurel Black, the most feared corporate litigator in London. She didn't carry a briefcase. She carried a tablet and a smile that promised ruin. "You can't be in here, Gideon," Marcus stammered, stopping his pacing. He tried to muster his CEO voice, but it came out thin and reedy. "This is a closed session. Security." "Your security works for me now," Gideon said, his voice calm, conversational, and utterly chilling. He walked past the stunned directors to the head of the table. He didn't ask Marcus to move. He simply stood behind the CEO's chair and placed a hand on the backrest. Marcus, sensing the alpha shift in the room, instinctively scrambled out of the seat. Gideon sat down. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, when the Tokyo markets opened," Gideon began, clasping his hands on the table, "Worthington Private Equity executed a leveraged buyout of the outstanding debt held by your three largest creditors." The room erupted. "That's hostile," Henderson shouted, his face turning purple. "That's illegal. We have poison pill protocols." "It's not hostile, Henderson. It's capitalism," Laurel Black said, her voice smooth as velvet. She tapped her tablet, casting the screen onto the massive boardroom monitor that covered the north wall. The graph on the screen showed a red line plunging into the abyss, Vista's stock price, but at the bottom, a massive green bar shot up. "You tried to trigger your poison pill," Laurel explained, "but you forgot that the majority of your Class B voting shares are held by institutional investors. Investors who, as of 20 minutes ago, sold their blocks to us at a premium." She swiped the screen. A pie chart appeared. It was almost entirely blue. "We own 51% of the voting stock," Laurel said, "and we own 100% of your debt." "You bought a failing airline just to fire us?" Marcus whispered, horrified. "Gideon, the losses. You'll bleed millions a day." "I didn't buy it to make money, Marcus," Gideon said, locking eyes with the man who had ignored his phone call 3 days ago. "I bought it to kill it." He stood up slowly and walked around the table, making eye contact with every single director. "You sat in this room," Gideon said, his voice dropping to a low growl, "and you debated the price of my son's life. You haggled over $5 million while he was lying in a hospital bed, terrified and alone." "We didn't know it was your son," a board member protested. "That," Gideon roared, slamming his hand onto the table, "is the problem. If he had been a white kid in a blazer or your kid, Henderson, Camille Archer wouldn't have dared touch him. But because he was a black boy in a hoodie, you created a culture where he was a target." "That's not true," Marcus argued weakly. "We have diversity training." "Laurel," Gideon said. Laurel swiped the screen again. An internal email appeared, magnified for everyone to see. From Marcus Sterling, CEO subject, Revenue Protection. Priority, high. Date, October 12th. Crew are encouraged to aggressively profile for upgrade fraud. Anyone appearing non-compliant with first-class cabin standards should be scrutinized. We are losing revenue to unauthorized upgrades. Be vigilant. Aggressively profile. Gideon read the words like a death sentence. Non-compliant with standards. You loaded the gun, Marcus. Camille Archer just pulled the trigger. You told your staff that a black teenager with a cello case doesn't belong in first class. You gave her the mandate. Gideon, please, Marcus begged, his hands shaking. We can restructure. We can issue a public apology. We can name a scholarship after him. You're fired, Gideon said. All of you. You can't just fire the whole board, Henderson yelled, standing up. We have contracts. We have golden parachutes. Gideon smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Laurel, tell them about the parachutes. Clause 14, Section B of your employment agreements, Laurel recited from memory. Gross negligence resulting in severe reputational damage or loss of licensure constitutes a breach of contract, voiding all severance packages, stock options, and pension accruals. This isn't gross negligence, Henderson spat. The FAA just suspended your operating certificate pending a safety review, Gideon said. That is the definition of loss of licensure. Your parachutes didn't just fail to open, gentlemen. They never existed. My pension? Marcus whispered, sinking into a chair. I have 30 years. Frozen, Gideon said, pending the investigation into corporate malfeasance. And by the time Laurel is done with you in civil court, you'll be lucky if you have enough left to buy a bus ticket. Gideon checked his watch. Security is waiting in the lobby to escort you out. You have 5 minutes to clear your desks. Anything you leave behind belongs to me. If you touch a computer, you will be arrested for corporate espionage. If you shred a document, you will be arrested for obstruction of justice. He pointed to the door. Get out of my building. It was a rout. The board members scrambled, shouting into their phones, grabbing their briefcases in a panic. Henderson looked like he was having a cardiac event. Marcus Sterling stood frozen, looking at the empire he had built, now reduced to ash by the father of the boy he had ignored. As the room cleared, leaving only the echo of their panic, Gideon remained still. He walked to the window and looked out at Chicago. Somewhere out there, Rowan was safe. Laurel stepped up beside him. Phase 1 complete. The stock is tanking. We can strip the assets and rebrand the fleet under the new management protocol by next quarter. Good, Gideon said, adjusting his cufflinks. Now let's go to the courthouse. I want to see her face when the hammer drops. The trial of Camille Archer was not swift. It was a slow, agonizing dissection of a human being's character. Because the crime occurred on an international flight diverting to Iceland, jurisdiction was complex, but Gideon had exerted pressure. The United States Department of Justice had taken the lead, charging her under federal statutes regarding interference with flight crew and endangerment of life. The courtroom in Chicago was packed. Camille sat at the defense table. She looked different. The perfect blonde bun was gone, replaced by limp, unwashed hair. The red lipstick was scrubbed away, leaving her face pale and drawn. She wore a gray cardigan that hung loosely on her frame. She had been out on bail, but she was a prisoner in her own home. The internet had found her address. People stood outside her house 24/7 playing recordings of shattering glass. She had lost her friends. Her fiancé had left her the day the video leaked. The prosecution called their star witness. The state calls Rowan Hollister. A murmur went through the court. The back doors opened and Rowan walked in. He looked healthier now, though still thin. He wore a simple suit, his cello pin on the lapel. He didn't look at the gallery. He walked straight to the stand. Gideon sat in the front row, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Amelia Ford. No, Amelia Ford was the witness. The prosecutor was Mr. Vance. Rowan, Vance asked gently, can you tell the jury what Ms. Archer said to you when you showed her your insulin? Rowan took a breath. He looked at Camille. For the first time, Camille looked back. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked terrified. She saw the boy she had dismissed as a thug or a fraud, and now she saw the power he held over her existence. She said it was a biohazard. Rowan's voice was steady, amplified by the microphone. She said I didn't belong in her cabin. She called me a junkie. And when you begged, she laughed, and then she crushed it. The courtroom was silent. You could hear the hum of the HVAC system. Did you feel like you were going to die? Rowan paused. I felt like I didn't matter. Like my life was less important than her clean carpet. The jury, 12 ordinary citizens, looked at Camille with open hostility. But the final nail in the coffin came from the defense's own attempt to salvage her character. Camille took the stand, against her lawyer's advice. She wanted to explain. She wanted to say she was just following rules. I was scared, Camille sobbed into the microphone. He reached into his bag. In this post-9/11 world, we are trained to be vigilant. Laurel Black, who had been granted special permission to assist the prosecution, stood up for cross-examination. She walked toward Camille like a panther stalking a wounded deer. Ms. Archer, Laurel said, her voice silky. You say you were scared of a weapon? Yes, a needle is a weapon. I see. Laurel picked up a piece of evidence. It was the flight manifest. You served the passenger in 2B a steak knife with his dinner, did you not? That's standard service. So a 5-inch serrated steel blade is standard service, but a 4mm diabetic needle is a lethal threat? It's different, Camille snapped. Why? Laurel leaned in. Why is it different, Camille? Is it because of the object? Or is it because of the hand holding it? Camille opened her mouth, then closed it. The trap snapped shut. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. She couldn't answer without incriminating herself. No further questions, Laurel said, turning her back. The verdict took 2 hours. Guilty, on all counts. The judge, a stern man who had little patience for bigotry, peered over his glasses. Ms. Archer, you held a position of trust. You used that trust to weaponize your authority against a vulnerable minor. You showed no mercy. This court will show you none. Sentence: 8 years in federal prison. As the bailiff cuffed her hands behind her back, the same hands that had crushed the vial, Camille didn't scream. She just slumped. She looked at the gallery, searching for anyone who cared. She saw Gideon. He wasn't smiling. He just watched her, his face a mask of stone. It wasn't triumph. It was just the garbage being taken out. 6 months later. The private hangar at O'Hare Airport was buzzing with activity, but it wasn't for a flight. It was for a launch. The side of the massive Boeing 777 was no longer painted with the Vista Airways logo. It was painted a deep, regal blue with a single gold word on the tail, Halo. Gideon stood on the stage, a microphone in hand. Beside him stood Rowan, holding his cello case. When I bought this airline, Gideon addressed the crowd of press and industry leaders, I did it out of anger. I wanted to destroy it. But my son taught me that destruction is easy. Building something better is hard. He put a hand on Rowan's shoulder. Today we launch Halo Aviation, the first airline with mandatory medical empathy training for every crew member. The first airline with onboard biosensors in every seat to detect medical emergencies before they become critical. And the first airline to implement Rowan's Law. The crowd applauded. Rowan stepped forward. He looked shy, but he smiled. Rowan's Law was a new industry standard that required all aircraft to carry emergency universal insulin and glucose supplies and strictly prohibited the confiscation of medical devices without direct pilot authorization. After the speech, the crowd dispersed to tour the new plane. Gideon and Rowan walked away from the noise, sitting on a bench near the runway. You did good, kid, Gideon said. You didn't have to buy the whole company, Dad, Rowan laughed. A lawsuit would have worked. I'm a Worthington. Gideon smirked. We don't do half measures. Besides, I needed a place to park the jet. They watched the new Halo plane taxi out. What happened to her? Rowan asked quietly. He didn't say the name. He didn't have to. She's in a facility in upstate New York, Gideon said. She's working in the laundry. Minimum wage. She lost her pension. She lost her house to pay her legal fees. She will spend the next 8 years folding sheets. Rowan looked down at his hands. I don't hate her. Gideon looked at his son, amazed by his capacity for grace. You're a better man than I am, Rowan, because I hate her enough for both of us. I don't hate her, Rowan repeated, looking up at the sky where a plane was cutting through the clouds. I just feel sorry for her. She was so afraid of me that she threw away her whole life. That's a sad way to live. Gideon put his arm around his son. It is, but you have a life to live. How's the audition piece coming? Rowan grinned, unzipping the cello case. Want to hear it? Here? On the tarmac? Why not? It's your airport. Rowan sat up, positioned the cello between his knees, and drew the bow across the strings. The sound was deep, mournful, and beautiful. It rose above the noise of the turbines, above the memory of the fear, above the anger. It was the sound of survival. The world moved on, as it always does. But the scars of Flight 404 remained, not as wounds, but as reminders. Camille Archer sat in her cell, staring at the concrete wall. She had plenty of time to think about the moment she opened that trash compactor. She realized too late that the biohazard wasn't the boy in seat 1A. The biohazard was the hate she carried in her own heart. And like any untreated infection, it had consumed her. Rowan Hollister went on to the Royal Academy. He became a cellist of renown, known not just for his music, but for the quiet dignity he carried into every room. He never flew without his father again, not out of fear, but out of love. And Gideon? He ran the airline with an iron fist and a soft heart. He kept the shattered vial of insulin in a glass case on his desk. A reminder that power is not about who you can crush, but who you can save. Karma didn't just hit Camille Archer, it obliterated her. But for Rowan and Gideon, the turbulence had finally cleared. They had reached their cruising altitude, and the view from the top was clear. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. What do you think? Did Camille deserve the 8 years? Or was losing her career enough? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories where justice is served cold and the underdog wins, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell. You don't want to miss the next flight. Thanks for watching and stay safe out there.